The Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast has been in association with Charles Tyrwhitt over the course of this Ashes series. If you want to start the year off by wearing something sharp, Charles Tyrwhitt has a collection of smart casual menswear perfect for cricketers, professional and novice alike. So it finishes 4-0, and I think we all believe that probably flatters England a little bit. A collapse of 56 for 10 felt like a rather apt way for the series to end as Australia won their 13th home Ashes test in 15. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today is the magazine editor of Wisden Cricket Monthly, Joe Harman, the editor-in-chief of Wisden Cricket Monthly, Phil Walker, and the managing editor of Wisden.com, Ben Gardner. We'll talk about the fallout from Hobart, Virat Kohli's resignation as India Test skipper, South Africa's series win over India, and much more. We've had loads of great questions sent in today, so we'll be basing the show a little bit more around those than we usually would. But first, let's head to Mark Butcher to hear his reaction to what happened over in Hobart. Butch, you labelled England's defeat pathetic on BT Sport. Was that second innings collapse as bad as you've seen from an England team?
Well, normally you'd be able to just immediately say yes, wouldn't you? But I mean, there have been that many in the recent past that you have to sort of stop yourself and think. But I think potentially that was as bad as it gets. Side devoid of confidence, yes. Sort of at the back end of a long and bruising trip, yes. COVID bubbles, all of those things, notwithstanding, it was still pretty spineless, wasn't it? I mean, that's kind of, and it kind of highlighted a lot of nearly all of the points that have come up over the past year to 18 months or so about England's batting. Technical problems, decisions, decisions made on the best place to sort of withstand in order to withstand high quality bowling. I mean, Christ, if there's ever been a better illustration of what we're talking about in terms of standing on your off stump, than Ollie Pope's 2 dismissals in that game, I don't know what is. You nick one defending 8th stump and then get bowled around your legs middle stump. It's just, and this is from a lad who can play, Yeah. So it was pretty horrendous. And, there's obviously always a bit of emotion knocking around at whatever time in the morning that was, having been up all night. But I think I can stand by ghastly and pathetic as being relatively fair.
Yeah, I was wondering, do you think we've got worse at judging batters in this country? So like 20 years ago, or even more recently, when batters came through, they generally had fairly stable defences, and players who stood out were the guys who could, it was a prerequisite that they had good, solid foundations in their game. And now we're almost swooned off our feet by some of the shots that young batters can play, and the solid foundations aren't quite there yet. And do we presume that these problems are more fixable than they are? A lot of the way ex-pros have been talking about Pope and Crawley has got all the talent in the world, make a couple of quick fixes and they'll be okay. Is it as simple as that?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, you have to make a judgment on your own game as to what needs fixing and how you go about it. I think there's been an enormous amount of denial around a lot of the issues, and then of course, it's all very well and good. Having the sort of the technical capabilities, but also the mentality is required to want to soak up lots of deliveries and to battle through and make ugly runs, get yourself in, potentially about 150 balls for 50 or 60. I mean, and those types of things are not as easy to fix. It's not as simple, not as straightforward as hitting millions of balls and sorting out your setup. So look, there are all kinds of issues here. That aren't sort of fast fixes, but I do think with some of the more sort of agile and blessed hand-eye coordinated batters, that with a bit of will on their part and a bit of expert judgment from whoever it is that they trust to sort them out, that those problems are not unfixable. The problem, I guess, becomes how far the confidence gets eroded before you end up with a mental scar that makes it impossible for you to make runs at that level, no matter what happens. And I hope we aren't there with either of those two mentioned yet, but we might not be far away. So yeah, I mean, we saw, going back to sort of my era or the eras that I straddled, the first examples you come up with are Ram Prakash and Hick, aren't you? Two guys with all the ability in the world who, for one reason or another, didn't kind of make the transition to make regular contributions at Test match level. And a lot of people would point to, being picked and dropped and messed around. I mean, that doesn't apply nowadays, does it? If you get picked on the back of ability, and let's not forget these two guys are very young. The two that we're talking about at the moment. You tend to get large amounts of Test matches on the bounce to give these guys the opportunity to kind of to reach their potential. I was thinking about this, funnily enough, just this morning, that with older players, when you pick somebody from the age of, I don't know, say 29 and upwards, you kind of the expectation is that they will go in and contribute straight away, because you don't have the time to allow them to bed in. So you're looking for immediate results when you pick older players. So they're easier to drop if they have a rough old time of it. Think Joe Denley. I wonder why that's just popped into my head suddenly. Darren Milan recently. Me, if you go back all the way to the time when I played, if I hadn't have had a decent Ashes in 2001 when I got recalled to the side, I wouldn't have played after that. They would have gone back to the younger players. But with the older guys, it's incumbent upon them to keep their place, and with the younger guys, it's incumbent upon them to show that they're improving, and back up the investment that is being made in their futures and in England's future.
I mean, if you were Ashley Giles or Chris Silverwood, what would you be thinking about how you'd manage Ollie Pope? The West Indies tour isn't that far away. There's no first-class cricket in between now and then. And it's interesting you bring up that comparison with Ram Prakash in particular. Ollie Pope's now played 23 Test matches. He averages 28. Yeah. He's got 100 from 23 Tests, which is a pretty similar ratio to what Ramp's had in Test cricket. Everyone talked about him as a future England, 100 Test banker 2 years ago. It's not happened. The runs have completely fallen off a cliff. How do you manage him in the short term?
Well, I mean, if he didn't go to the West Indies, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Because I think in the same way we've had this discussion about somebody like Dom Sibley, who took the decision to take himself away to go and sort out some technical issues. I think it would probably do Ollie Pope just as much good to go behind closed doors and figure out exactly what it is that he is trying to do with his technique, and then come back at a time when when he's got runs behind him and the spotlight isn't quite so fierce. I don't think that would do him any harm at all. He's a baby. He's so young, as is Zach Crawley. And funny you should ask, what would Silverwood and Giles and all that? Well, I mean, it might not be their decision to make, to be honest with you. So it might be that by then a decision has been made. They get a hotline to Gary Kirsten or someone like that and go, come, we need new eyes on all of this, and somebody else can come in and make a call as to what to do.
Are some players just better at working on their own games? Because I'm just trying to imagine what that process is like. You're learning in indoor schools in the winter with balls that don't do as much, bowlers who don't do as much. You can almost lull yourself into a false sense of security that whatever you're doing is working, and then you get into the middle and you're facing someone bowling 88 miles per hour, the ball's doing a bit. It's a completely different game.
Yeah, I mean which is kind of, I'm glad you've asked me that, because that's kind of part of the reason that all us old dinosaurs have been going on about sort of fundamentals of technique. Is that you don't ever replicate sort of the moving ball or particular scenarios when you're practicing. What you do is you give yourself a basis of a method which will be able to cope when these extremes come about, or at least give you a chance when these extremes come about. And the point that we've been banging on about over and over and over again is that they're giving themselves, they're making it more difficult for themselves before the balls even come out of the bowler's hand. So when things get really extreme, then it becomes almost impossible. Your technique and your sort of setup is there to help you, not to make life more difficult. And now Sir Alistair Cook and all of the other old blokes who you can dismiss if you like, have all pretty much said the same thing. And it's not because we think we were better in our day. It's far from that. Absolutely far from that. It's just because we understood that there was kind of, the reason why things have been done a certain way over a long period of time is because it gives you the best chance. Then your natural ability, your mental application, all of these other things, are things that you put on top of solid foundations. The foundation itself doesn't make you the runs. You also need that ability, that hunger, the desire, all of the rest of it as well.
And finally, you mentioned Chris Silverwood and Ashley Giles. There'll be some listeners, there might be many listeners, who'll be comparing this to the aftermath of a England football tournament disgraceful early exit. And when England lost against Iceland in 2016 in the Euros there, Roy Hodgson, he sent in his resignation that evening. People will be wondering, why hasn't that happened here? It doesn't get any worse than this. Chris Silverwood's been in charge now for 2 and a bit years, and there are all the mitigating circumstances that you mentioned at the top. But at the end of the day, players haven't improved. I'd be interested to hear Ashley Giles' answer to the question, what has Silverwood done right in the last year? But yeah, what do you think? The reason why I ask you this is because the noise is coming out of Australia from journalists, I think, has changed a little bit since off the Melbourne. I don't think it is now taken for granted that Silverwood will leave his post.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the grandest of ironies would be that the head coach whose position, whose future is more uncertain at the moment, is that of Justin Langer.
Yeah.
Who just won the World T20 and smashed England in the Ashes. Look, I mean, all of those things. If, for example, all of the decision making that had gone on, resting and rotating players, various selectorial decisions, the decision from above Chris Silverwood to make him not only head coach but also chief selector after they ditched Ed Smith. The decision making around the teams that were played or not played during the summer against New Zealand in the lead up to the India series, all of which were described as great preparation for the Ashes. If none of those things had taken place, and if every 4-year cycle wasn't a lead up to an away Ashes series, then you could say, well, all right, perhaps all of the other extenuating circumstances kind of excuse what's happened. But unfortunately, all of that stuff happened. All of that stuff was discussed at great length. All of that stuff was used as reasoning behind, players coming into the side, playing one test match and then disappearing off for a rest. Was used for, the reasons why rotation was so important, why Broad and Anderson couldn't play in the same team at the same time. All of this was because we were going to go down to the Ashes and be the best prepared, England team that's ever gone down there, and we were going to retain them. That was the remit. That was the job, not the job description, but that was what that was the manifesto. And it should have been 5-0, shouldn't it? I mean, let's be frank. A declaration here or a rain shower there, and we'd be looking at yet another 5. A team that hasn't made 300 at 10 attempts. Didn't manage to bat 100 overs in a couple of the test matches. I mean, it's just horrendous.
I think that's an apt way to finish the show. Cheers, Butch. See you soon. Ben, you watched pretty much every ball of that test. What did you make of that?
It's kind of a greatest hit, if that's the right word, of wearing them and kind of going wrong over the past year or so. I mean, it's funny because it started kind of brightly. It was a green wicket, which, everyone's saying that's been the problem with county cricket, that the wicket's been too green. It's like now England had one, and they kind of had a chance to show how used to them they were. They had Australia, 12 for 3 early on, and then Woakes. I think obviously the batting is the focus, but we'll talk a bit more about Woakes a bit later on. But that was a very poor spell to follow up. Wood was also quite expensive, and then Australia kind of took the game away in 300 and a bit, which looked like way too many. And then the batting was like everything that people have been saying, just reeled out again. I mean, you had Pope beaten on both sides, not just of his bat, but of his body. He was sort of playing at about 7th or 8th stump in the first innings, and then bowled behind his legs And that's just that those are the when you're batting on off stump, those are, you should be able to hit the balls that are on your stumps, and you should be able to leave outside. And neither of those, he was completely flummoxed both times. I mean, and then it was just a farce by the end, wasn't it? You had Stokes pulling one out into the deep. You had everyone just playing wild shots at the end. I mean, and maybe if you're Ollie Robinson, even he was supposed to be able to bat when he came to the side, getting bowled with 1 foot off the pitch. But then even like Woakes just having like an absolutely wild slog and going to Boland. And because even that 4 things had started kind of well. Like England put on their best opening stand in the Ashes for 8 years, home or away. And then we're still 124.
I don't think we should be celebrating that.
Well, that, well, no,
that's particularly.
But like they kind of and to go from that platform to just a horrendous capitulation again. I mean, I don't know if from 68 all out, I don't know if anyone did have any sort of hope at all. I kind of did slightly. I mean, I kind of thought that maybe Australia had sort of taken their eye off it a little bit, and that the target was like getting near to 200. And England have, even though they never make 300, they have sometimes made 200. And then, to then fail so badly from there, it was just awful, basically. And I don't know. It's hard because after every game, you're inclined to say that was the lowest point. I don't know if that is worse than 68 all out in Melbourne, but I kind of think maybe it just is. I mean, it was 56 for 10 at the end of it, which is pretty bad. So yeah, pretty bad.
Joe, there was one major positive though. Mark Wood was brilliant, and he's bowled well throughout the series without possibly getting the rewards that he deserved, but he got those rewards at Hobart.
That was genuinely fantastic to see, because I think he was averaging 42 heading into this test match, which was such an unfair stat for the energy and the kind of enthusiasm he'd put in. And actually, I think we had a conversation in the office just on Friday. At what point do you just stop saying Mark Wood's unlucky and actually that he's not doing things right to take wickets? And I've always felt that he is an unlucky bowler, and he got a couple of lucky wickets in there, and they were completely deserved based on what he'd put in. So that was one silver lining, I suppose. Although it's hard to take. That's not my overwhelming feeling, has to be said. In answer to Ben, did I have any hope there at 60 odd for none? No, none at all. And
that's because you had 20 quid riding on it.
Yeah, I just knew that wasn't going to happen. I think one of the draining things about this series is one of the beauties of a test series, particularly 5 test series, and we don't get them very much these days, is the way they kind of undulate and narratives develop and change over the course of a series. But this felt so well established right from the very start. And every time you thought there might be something slightly different, we just had the same thing happen again. And it made it hard to watch. It made it really hard I found personally, to stay invested, because certainly by 3rd, 4th, 5th test, we just knew what was going to happen. And that's because in the England changing room, they knew what was going to happen. And you know that 2 wickets goes down, 3 wickets goes down, and then they all collapse in a heap. And, I'm sure we're going to get onto this, but significant change is needed. Otherwise, it's going to keep happening.
Phil, one storyline that came to the fore, I guess, that's been there before in the series was Ollie Robinson's fitness. So despite having a pretty good series with the ball, England's bowling coach John Lewis spoke to the press at the end of the game, spoke to BT Sport, specifically calling out his fitness and saying it's not good enough for test level. And Hugh asked, I just want to ask why it's taken the coaching staff this long to realise that his fitness and stamina needs to be improved. It was readily apparent in the summer against India when, as I recall, Shane Warne did a Sky Sports segment just on that. Why did it take him playing an Ashes series with the coaching staff to realise this? They've had half an off-season to work with him before the Ashes started. Isn't this seriously incompetent? I guess it's possible that the coaches have known this the entire time, but they got to a breaking point, I guess, that in this series that they felt that he wasn't looking after himself in the way that a test bowler should.
I don't think... and there was a bit of sniffiness around John Lewis saying what he said. Personally, I didn't think there was much wrong with it. And I don't think Robinson would either. I was speaking to somebody who did a long interview with him recently, which will come out in due course, and he said he was refreshingly honest about his own not limitations, but his own naivety as an international cricketer, and he knows that there are certain things that he needs to do better, and one of them was the fitness. And this conversation was had before John Lewis came out publicly. So it's something that Robinson himself is conscious of. It's something clearly that the England management are increasingly concerned about. And I think what you will see is is a kind of make or break 6 months for him from here on in. Is it indicative of a wider malaise? I think it might be a bit simplistic to throw it into that argument. Really, I think Robinson clearly has problems of stamina across the course of a Test match. We've seen it. That he was bowling off breaks in one of the Test matches. He comes back and he knows himself. You can't bowl 70 mile an hour. Literally, I think one over was 69 on average MPH. You can't bowl that and get away with it at Test level. However, what he is an extremely skillful bowler, and his record is good. So if you are looking for tiny crumbs of comfort, then Robinson has come through and looked like he can take Test wickets. It's frustrating, I suppose, that he seems to epitomise much of the flabbiness, pun intended, around this team at the moment. I don't think they were helped with their preparation, but from what I've heard here and there, I don't think quite a few players weren't happy with their preparation either, the intensity of the preparation. There's been some murmurs regarding certain players' training routines, individual training routines not being up to scratch. These are the kinds of things that surface. I think there was a piece in the Telegraph this morning by Nick Holt as well, the inside story of this horror tour. Well,
the headline just sums up, it's fat shaming, too much drinking and not enough talking, the inside story of England's Ashes disaster.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, Nick Holt's obviously right in there, and he knows his stuff inside out and far closer to the current setup than I am. But I've heard similar things via other journalists privately as well. Again, what happens is, rightly, the stench moves further up, right? And then you have to look at the people who are calling the shots at the top. There is no administration that's not a reflection of its leader, right? And this week again is another example of it. Well, I'm not sure that the coach in particular can keep running for much longer.
I think I agree that I don't think there's a huge issue with John Lewis saying what he said, and that we would be more annoyed if he was saying, like, trying to take the positives and that sort of thing. But I don't think he said it entirely selflessly and just with a view to sort of like giving Ollie Robinson a kick up the backside. I think it is notable how since sort of the second or third Test, when people were saying, like, what are England's coaches even doing? Like, what is the point of having so many backroom staff? They've almost been kind of queuing up to kind of slag off members of England's team, basically. I mean, Thorpe did that very public evisceration of Burns' technique.
Yeah, Giles' self-serving interview after Melbourne as well.
Yeah.
I would just say about Lewis and Robinson, though, they are very close as he is his man. Robinson respects and likes Lewis from what I've heard. They work very closely together. So possibly it's actually from a sense of closeness that he felt able to say what he said. Yeah,
but I guess you either have two different possibilities. One is that they haven't been saying this behind closed doors, and this is probably a general thing. And then it's like, what have they been doing? Or they have been saying behind closed doors and they just haven't been able to get the message across at all. And then you also wonder, like, would sort of different coaches, would a good coach basically be able to sort of impress upon players the need to change? And because that change isn't happening, as you say, you do have to focus quite heavily on those coaching staff.
I guess it's a talking point because Robinson has done well when he's been fit and be able to bowl close to his maximum speed. Before we kind of go into the bigger questions, Andrew asked, where does Chris Woakes stand now? Joe, we talked about Woakes being possibly an improved bowler with a Kookaburra and overseas going into the series, and on paper, he's Phil mentioned it on last week's show. He's, other than Mark Wood, he's probably England's quickest bowler out there. We've been talking about how he's been bowling in white ball cricket and how it's actually quite suited to the way he bowls as a white ball, quite similar to how you'd expect someone to be successful with a red ball as well. What do you think's gone wrong there? Because he's had actually a worse series than he did in 2017-18.
Yeah, I mean, the honest answer is I don't know. I think we all sat around at the start of the series and thought he was going to be, if not a kind of defining force in the series, certainly a really useful one for England and pivotal to the balance of the side, but also really worth his place as a bowler alone. And he hasn't been really. I mean, if it wasn't for his batting, I don't think he'd have played as much as he did. He just didn't really look threatening. I think he was potentially a little bit unlucky in the first Test, thinking back to a few weeks now, but really he hasn't looked threatening. And actually, more concerning, he's looked easy to score off as the series has gone on, and that hasn't generally been the case with Woakes. all that said, I certainly wouldn't be binning him off as a Test cricketer by any means. His record in England is still superb with bat and ball. He's still in amongst England's bowlers. There aren't many who can bat, and that is a problem. That's a problem home and away. So he continues to offer value there. But it certainly means, when we come to the next away tour, there was the hope that Woakes had turned a corner as a bowler overseas and he'd be able to offer more. And this series suggests that isn't the case, and that we perhaps do need to think of him more as not a home specialist, but that he offers much more value at home, and he's perhaps a bits and pieces backup player overseas.
I mean, I was surprised because I fancied him to have a decent series on probably relatively flimsy evidence. In reality, there was a bit of blind faith going on initially, and I hold my hands up there on that one. But it's also fine margins as well. And sometimes, if you take, say, a dozen wickets as a seamer, an England seamer in an Ashes in Australia, then that's not a bad return. And the first morning, Brisbane, that catch on the half volley that Root took at first slip from Labuschagne's outside edge, when Labuschagne was on no more than a handful, and he went on to get 70 odd, that then enabled them to move away from England in that game. And of course, England were 200 for 2 in the third innings. That kind of moment was very... If that had gone to hand, then he's in the series, he's got a big pole, and then he can start to maybe build a little bit more on the back of that. He's not bulletproof, Chris Woakes. He's a very level-headed character, but he will know himself that he's always been striving to prove something to himself away from home. And when those little early moments go against you, and you see it as we saw it as well with some of the batters as well, when those when you lose those early moments, your confidence collapses, and then it becomes this sort of agonizing horror that you just go further and deeper into yourself and more into your shell, and you were seeing it with any number of players by the end of the series.
It did seem surprising as well. I haven't looked at the CricViz data that comes through, but it really looked like he wasn't getting much movement at all compared certainly to the Aussie seamers. And that I don't know why that would be. I understand the cricketer doesn't move as much, but why is Woakes, who does get movement, not getting as much as other bowlers? That seems odd, and maybe that's, I don't know. Is that just a bit of lack of zip? Is I don't know. I don't look at him and see an obvious reason for why he hasn't been effective, but he just hasn't looked like taking wickets.
Yeah, I think by the end of the series, I think he just wasn't very accurate. He did bowl more bad balls than you expect Chris Woakes to bowl. And I think at the start of the series, and I remember in Brisbane, I think he got probably a little bit too much criticism for how he bowled. I thought he actually did okay. So yeah.
Much of it was based on his white ball form, but as he said to me, and it's well known, white ball swings if you're lucky for 2 overs, and then you're coming back to, knuckleballs and off cutters and breakbacks and this, that, and the other, and you're bowling wide of the crease and block hole stuff. So that became his every day. That became his weekly work, if you like, with a white kookaburra, knowing that it's not going to swing. In England, and you can present the Duke's ball, the proud seam, and all the rest of it, and that will have been the ball that he'd have been bowling with in his own conditions for 10, 15 years. What he's found is he's not alone in English, in the story of English medium fast seamers going out to Australia and pulling up lame.
Ben, just finally on the Hobart Test match, England did get Australia 12-3 early on.
But then they dropped Labuschagne for naught in the same passage of play.
Yeah.
Crucial. That 40 odd's crucial in the context of the game.
Absolutely, definitely. But yeah, just wanted to get your take on another Travis Head 100 under pressure before the series started. And then at the Brisbane 100, he was kind of taking advantage of a very tired England attack on that second evening. Whereas this was slightly different. He was taking the attack to England when the ball was doing a fair bit, and it paid off massively.
Yeah, I guess he did get to come in just after the new ball bowlers had gone, but he was brilliant on that first day. It was a proper sort of counter punch, and actually he was the first person to retake it back to Australia, and then Labuschagne also played well for that 40 odd before being bowled in ridiculous fashion. Amazing how that's probably not even in the top 5 most embarrassing sniffs in the Test match by the end.
No, I think it was.
Well, yeah, I guess
he literally landed flat on his face.
That's true. I guess. But Rob's had a foot off the pitch. Anyway, but yeah, he was really, really good, and I think he was one of those that England would have looked to target before the series as a potential weak link in that batting order. And then actually, when you look at Labuschagne averaging under 50 in the series, England would have taken that as a small one before the series. Smith averaging 30 without 100, Warner averaging 34. England, if you asked England if they could have all those before the series, they would have been very grateful.
We sat around here and we talked about, look, we said there's no questioning that Australia have got a strong core. It's the periphery players that look weak. So the strong players will do well and the weak players can be exploited. And actually, I would say Australia's player of the series, I know Head took the award, and probably fairly enough, given that there weren't a huge amount of runs scored. But then probably Boland and Cam Green. I mean, Cummins would have to be in the conversation as well. But I would say with those top three, and they're fringe players. I mean, Boland couldn't have been much more than a fringe player. Whereas England, the big players didn't step up, and none of the players on the fringes who had the opportunity to make a name for themselves did that either.
Yeah, definitely. Now, let's get to the bigger questions. Phil, you've already said in this episode that you think Chris Silverwood should go. I think there'll be a lot of England fans listening to this who will be surprised that Chris Silverwood hasn't already gone. I think if this was a football team, the manager may well have already been sacked or resigned by this point. But we've talked in the pod we did after the MCG test. We talked a lot about the underlying structural issues that England face. But I'm trying to get my head round why have England's batters been this bad? Like, 2 openers averaging less than 15, only Johnny Bairstow averaging more than 33. We've seen teams overcome structural problems recently, deliver results, and sure, the coaching staff is to blame to a certain degree, but why has it been this bad? And is that the head coach's fault?
It's obviously not squarely anybody's fault, but Zach Crawley, all right, shoots of recovery. It was a really good 70-odd in the 4th Test match, but Zach Crawley gone backwards. Ollie Pope gone dramatically backwards. Hasib Hamid unpickable from here on in, certainly in the short term, probably in the long. Johnny Bairstow came back into the side, hasn't really made a run until that marvellous 100. Fair play to him, and hopefully that changes his story again in a positive way. Apart from Root, everybody's average has fallen through the floor. He's not blameless. You can't be blameless. You can't be. It's a coach's job to go around the traps and identify certain issues and find the right time to have a word and put the right people in place and open up a few more channels of coaching information and expertise, and not just build this kind of siege mentality of denial around you and the setup, and insist that we can compete and we're doing okay and we're going to turn it around tomorrow, because that day never seems to come. Sure, it doesn't solve all the problems by any means, by any stretch of the imagination, but it seems to me that what England really are crying out for is a batting specialist coach. Duncan Fletcher demonstrably improved cricketers. He stood behind them and watched them in the nets, and he knew inside out the tiny little details of a batsman's technique, and he would help them. And he had clear-minded theories. Chris Silverwood's he's a bowling coach by trade, and moved very quickly through the ranks of county cricket and then England. And he's a good bloke, and they like him, and that's. In the pros and cons, that's very useful for him, because they do like him. They like the fact that he's upfront and straight talking and so on. They also probably like the fact that he's probably unstintingly loyal, and is not especially powerful or pushy or dominant a figure in the dressing room. He's quite a passive figure, and the big beast in that dressing room probably quite like that, because they probably feel safe. But I think that. I don't think we need that anymore. I don't think that really stands up anymore. Graham Thorpe it was a fascinating interview that Thorpe gave, distancing himself from responsibility. And again, there is absolute kernels of truth in what he says, of course. Graham Thorpe can't just solve the problem on his own, and the next batting coach and the next batting specialist coach who's enlisted can't just solve the problem just like that. But they can help. And I'm afraid it's a numbers game, isn't it? And the numbers are going only one way from everybody. You know, where's Rory Burns' game now? He made an Ashes 100 2 years ago. He made a very good 100 actually at Edgbaston against New Zealand earlier this year. Where's his game now? We can't accept that idea, that argument that, well, it's beyond me, mate. It's beyond me. It's beyond my responsibility. It's not even in my pay grade. Well, it is, because you're the coach and that's the job.
The only way Silverwood might have been able to get out of this was if he wasn't the selector and said, well, look, these are the players I've been given and they're not doing the job. What I couldn't have done any more. By making him selector as well, there is really no get out here. He can't be absolved of blame for both things. And he has picked players who haven't performed and he's coached players who haven't performed, and the results speak for themselves over the last year. There's no way he should continue in the role. And if he does, I think it's probably more to do with the schedule than anything else. I just wonder if they think they've got time to sort everything out before they pick a squad for the Caribbean. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you compare this to football, but you compare this to pretty much any other sport. You can't preside over this level of failure and keep your job. It's just...
Also, on a human level, immense sympathies for the bloke. I mean, he's literally lived probably at home for about 60 days a year for the last 2 years, trying to keep his head above water during a pandemic when you're, swabbing all over the world. And so I feel for him, massively so. It's too many jobs, too much stuff on his plate. Clearly, we have to revisit the split coach's idea. Giles was against it because he felt he had the rough end of the stick on that one when he was one-day coach and Andy Flower was test match coach. Well, I think now, with increasingly divergent games anyway, with a strong-minded and strong-willed director of cricket, is it Ashley Giles, or the manner of his decisions, do they have to threaten his own position as well? Well, many people are saying so. Michael Atherton wrote over the weekend in the Times that his position is untenable. But whoever that person is in the long term, they need to be strong-minded in saying who can be available and who can't, for sure. But I think in the long term, especially in the times that we live in, it has to play out now that we have two specialist coaches for the two different formats. Has to.
I do worry though that England won't get rid of Silverwood. Basically, like I think first of all, I think it's quite likely they'll say we're not going to make any decisions until our review, in whatever form that takes, is concluded.
Sue Gray,
But then I also think that, because as Phil says, there are it's not entirely Silverwood's fault, and he hasn't had the easiest go of it. That they will look at it and say that, like, after the first test against India last year, the first test away in India, it was going pretty well, and since then we had a rest and rotation policy which we didn't get exactly right, and we made them select, which we shouldn't have done, and there's been a bit of other misfortune. We've had some tough fixtures, and they'll do all of that and then say
had some tough fixtures does not count.
No, I'm not.
I know, but they
but I just worry that they'll say that, like, and if we can just kind of rewind to then, and so the question of fault is obviously a useful one to a degree, but I think the question is also, is Silverwood the person to turn this around? And I don't think that is I don't think he is. I mean, and I don't think if they ask themselves that question, they will think that Silverwood is a person who can get a batting group functioning. That is just not something that he is capable of right now, I think.
And change needs to happen really quickly, not just because it's awful to watch, but if you think what England have got coming up next, they're going to the Caribbean, where they haven't won since 2004. So they haven't won there. They've won in Australia more recently. They've won in the Caribbean. Then they've got home tests against South Africa, and obviously they've got New Zealand coming over as well. And then they go to Pakistan, and there are these, and you've got India sandwiched in there as well. If they could end up conceivably losing to West Indies, South Africa, and Pakistan, who are all ranked below them over the next year, and end up maybe 6th in the Test rankings, which would be humiliating, really, given the resources they've got at their disposal compared to some of the other countries we're talking about. If England end up plunging those depths, that is really as bad as when they hit bottom of the world in 1999. Given the disparity in resources now that has such an effect in world cricket. So they need to take serious action. Otherwise, this is rock bottom. I don't think we're even close to rock bottom. I mean, we've got thrashed in Australia, which happens all the time. I think this is exposing what could happen in the next 12 months. So action needs to be taken now rather than, oh, God, that was bad, but it can't get worse than that. I think that is incredibly naive if that's the viewpoint.
Sorry, Joe, what action do you think should be taken in the next month or so?
Well, Silverwood going, and there being split coaches for white ball and red. I think Giles probably has to go as well. I think if we're complaining about the selector and coach joint roles being fundamental to the issues that they're experiencing, that was that was Giles's call. So I think he probably has to go as well. They haven't got even got a chairman at ECB at the moment. I mean, how many people can
There's
you
rumours
sack?
about Strauss, who may be moving into that role. There's rumours around that. I don't
Chairman
know him
rather than
personally.
director of cricket
Chairman,
role.
yeah.
Yeah. I guess the thing with chairman is how much difference can you make? It always feels more of a kind of ambassadorial role. Ideally, you'd get Strauss back in the role that he did before and would take over from Giles, but he might well not fancy that now.
The tricky thing is as well, England, because they say they want a reset of the Test team and to start properly rebuilding the side, but that does become very difficult when you're already not a very good Test team, and it's very different to the 2015 team because every Test does matter in a way that it doesn't with one internationals. I mean, firstly, the team that England picked for that New Zealand series back then was just way better than the team they picked for the World Cup, but also it wouldn't have mattered if they'd have got beaten 4-1 or 5-0 in that series particularly. Because you can afford to, experiment in that form a bit more. Like each result doesn't carry the same currency, whereas England have to win in the West Indies, or like they have to pick the squad that they think that.
Do they though? Because they were absolutely not qualified for the World Test Championship final. So what's the point?
Well, I mean, because losing in West Indies would be horrific. Would like if you pick an experimental team and that lose in the West Indies, that's even worse. So when you're talking about the likes of players, who are we kind of know aren't the players that are going to get England up to the level of Australia or India, so the likes of maybe Rory Burns or Dawid Malan possibly, and they're not going to be in the side in maybe 5 years' time. But if they are in the best 11 to win a Test series in the West Indies, or to then it's a really tricky decision basically, because as your plans start getting messed up, you kind of lose your ability to plan as well, because each immediate result becomes even more important. And as Joe says, if England lose like their next 4 Test series, which is very possible, then like it is so much worse than right now, and so they have to pick the side that they think has the best chance of doing that, but that might not be the side that allows them to develop most in 2 or 3 years' time. So it's
Joe, what do you make of Joe Root's comments after the Test match about county cricket? He was asked about what he thinks about county cricket, and he said, "How long have you got? What I'd say is, what incentives in county cricket right now are there to open the batting right at the top of the order? What incentives are there to be a spinner? What incentives are there to bowl fast?" And that's all kind of fair and all things that lots of respected pundits have said in the last few weeks. But is there a danger that, Ben is talking about the possibility of Silverwood holding on to the role, that there's not enough ownership of what has happened in Australia? I mean, we were talking before the show about potential captaincy alternatives, and we basically all think that Root should probably stay in charge because there's literally no one else. And what do you think?
I think county cricket is an easy target, and that's not to say that there aren't many things that could be improved about the structure of the season. But I think, I spoke for the upcoming issue of the Wisden Cricket Monthly, which is out this week. Phil and I put together the 5 burning questions that England need to address right now. One of which is the county championship fit for purpose? And I spoke to Daryl Mitchell and Andy Hurry at Somerset and Ian Salisbury, obviously right at the heart of the county game. And they are, I think, instinctively protective of the county game, and I absolutely understand that. But they are also aware of the realities around it. But I think there is an issue if they don't want to be kind of tarred with the brush of a horrendous Ashes tour, and actually you end up doing things that aren't productive because they're based on a kind of emotional reaction to what we've seen in Australia. In terms of like the motivation of being an opening batter in red ball cricket, Daryl Mitchell was quite good on that, and he said when he came through, everything was focused towards red ball. Everything he worked on was focused towards getting your place in that championship side, and then everything else built out from there. So then you would start to think, do I get in the one-day team? And obviously we're almost at a point of complete reversal now. He also, as an opening batter himself, he just retired at the end of last year. He was talking about just how difficult it is to open the batting now, and he said, getting kind of quite technical, he said one of the kind of game changers over the last few years has been the wobble seam delivery. So he said, as an opening batter, he would face every opening bowler trying to move the ball away and nick him off. And he said that meant you could leave 60, 70, 8% of your deliveries to get yourself in. He said now with a wobble seam delivery on the 4th, 5th stump line, which might go either way, you're having to play so many more deliveries. Throw in that the pitches are probably worse. Throw in that you're playing in April and September, and it becomes a really, really tough role that is basically in no way representative of what you find when you step up to Test cricket. And that they each had, it summed up how difficult it is because they each had different views on how they should fix it. Ian Salisbury was adamant it's the pitches. He said at Sussex, he tells his groundsman to prepare a wicket as though he was preparing a wicket for a test match. He says he wants it to be as flat as possible and then spin a bit come the end of the match. Now, that's probably not necessarily serving Sussex that well. They've got young seamers who got basically taken around the park last year. They would probably be better served by having green seamers like you see elsewhere, 180 plays, 220 plays, and then you get some wins there or thereabouts. And Salisbury wants to see the ECB centralise groundsmen, so they get paid by the ECB, then they have control over the pitches, which I've heard that mentioned. I haven't perhaps heard it kind of seriously talked about in the press like some other ideas.
Each game has a match referee. Each county 4-day game has a match referee who turns up and watches how the game plays out and then makes a mark on that pitch. 14 of the 18 counties last year came out in the positive overall. They came out in the black, if you like. Only 4 of those 18 didn't. And the perception among the groundsmen, who are these peculiar kind of enigmas in English cricket or in the game full stop, they feel like, if anything, the marking system is actually a little bit too harsh. And I spoke to Gary Barwell, who's the Warwickshire head groundsman at Edgbaston, and he said he used the example of the game that they played last year against Essex when Warwickshire won on the final day and Yates made 100 against Harmer. And it was a good game of cricket and it was finished in the final session on day 4. And it was a really good game of cricket. And I saw quite a lot of that live myself. And it was a really good game. And that pitch was marked as good rather than very good because it didn't give enough turn at the end of the game. Now, this was a game in early May, on a good track overall, but and he was kind of saying this is a good thing that they are strict in inverted commas, but he would say, well, if we are the main causes here, the main culprits as English cricket goes through the floor, then why is that not being reflected in the marking system? He said. Gary Barwell said, and many others have, and Jamie Porter, the Essex's opening bowler, he said as well on Twitter a couple of days ago, and one easy win, maybe it's a bit superficial and simplistic, but the ball, the red Kookaburra versus the red Dukes doesn't move anywhere near as appreciably. So
you're saying specifically the seam is too big, basically. Yeah. And you're talking about the wobble seam, that ball you'd think would be more effective the larger the seam is, more of a target, basically.
So just as Australian state cricket experimented with the Dukes ball a couple of years ago because they wanted to get more used to playing that. So the case can easily be made. It would hurt the ball making company, but it wouldn't necessarily. It might actually help improve that balance between the bat and the ball, which is obviously so skewed at the moment. When you see medium paces averaging 14 for a season, and top order batsmen barely getting up to 35.
That's tricky though, isn't it? Because if you're going to use a Kookaburra in county championship cricket, then surely you'd have to use it in Test cricket as well, right? So you're using the same ball when you step up, and then England are throwing away a massive advantage in home tests because the Duke's ball serves them, obviously not so much last summer, but serves them very well. As soon as you move one thing, then you move another. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's cube.
Yeah. But if the overriding issue is that batsmen don't bat more than a session, then this would be one potential short-term experiment that could be done. It doesn't put anybody's nose out of joint, and it might reflect in nothing for sure. It may well do, but I can understand why that would be argued for. And it's interesting that Jamie Porter, who obviously benefits from having a Duke's ball, would be arguing against using one. So maybe a bit of kind of selflessness is required here.
And it is interesting to think about how this could improve the bowlers as well. Not just because you'd need to be quicker to be effective with it, but because you'd need to be, it's just a slightly different skill. When we were talking about Wokes earlier, I mean, he's been used most as a change bowler in the Ashes, and he's a good change bowler. He's a very good change bowler in England, first change bowler, but partly because that Duke's ball swings for a bit longer and does have that bigger target of the seam. Like Scott Boland was often able to get seam movement when England's bowlers wouldn't have been able to, and you wonder if that is just because you've got to bowl a wobble seamer a bit differently with the Duke's ball. Like if the Duke's ball has a bigger seam, presumably you can let it wobble more, and then if it hits it, maybe it decks away a bit more, whereas with a Kookaburra ball you might have to have it wobble less, and then it's just a tiny bit of nip, but that's actually what you need to do to give it the chance to do that, and that's something that would be improved as well.
And there were times in the series where Australia got more swing with the older ball, more conventional swing with the older ball, and you'd think that with the Duke's ball in England, sometimes that just keeps on swinging throughout an innings, basically. And if you're used to bowling with that, you're probably not as well practiced in trying to get an older ball to swing.
I'm more interested in the intensity of the cricket that's played rather than the surfaces personally.
And that's Andy Hurry said that was the absolute crux of it. He said we're not having the best play the best enough.
So how can you change that?
Well, he said he was a strong advocate of going back to the 2-division structure, which obviously we have. He was not being hugely critical because he said this has come about largely as a result of the restructured championship based on making county cricket continue during COVID time. So he wasn't against what had happened, but he said now we really have to get back to the best v best, first division, second division, and he was willing to consider reducing the number of fixtures if that was going to add to the intensity and add to the kind of sense of competition. And I think cutting fixtures would definitely benefit as well. Just in terms of like a match meaning more to everyone involved, and therefore a significant score means more. 5 for means more. I think we have to get to that point, and that helps the whole thing as well. That seems like a double win. By reducing the number of fixtures, you're increasing the intensity of red ball cricket, and also you're making it easier to fit into the schedule, which we know is a massive issue.
I think inevitably, in the end, before the next change after the end, we will end up with 3 tiers of 6 with promotion and relegation from those 3 divisions, and you'll be playing 10 games. And it may well be that there is an additional 2 games that you play to decide, like the Bob Willis Trophy equivalent or something like that. So you do have a showpiece. It might be that you end up playing 1 or 2 more than 10. But I think we will get to that point, and that top division will be high-class cricket everywhere you go. What happens in the fullness of time to that 3rd tier of 6 teams, many of whom don't not make any money, but actively lose money just by putting on 4-day cricket, and their survival instincts are naturally directed elsewhere, away from 4-day cricket. And if they become less a part of the championship system, then I wouldn't be surprised if that happens in the fullness of time, for sure.
And I mean, it's interesting you say that, because the end of the 2021 County Championship, when they split into 3 divisions, that Division 3 didn't feel great. Like, it was so far away. There was no meaning there at all. And understandably, county members and people who have affiliations to counties will be disappointed to see that play out, but it wouldn't be the death of those counties. And if anything, it might actually future-proof them a little bit more, because they could then focus their energies more in white ball cricket. They could play some kind of form of red ball cricket, maybe, but semi-first class as in fact, as like trial games, feeder games, hoping that can then help the players move into that top 12 bracket. But I think it is going to happen one day, whether we like it or hate it. I think it will happen eventually. And it's not that far away from what Jonathan Agnew has proposed. And I think what he's proposed is not brand new. Other people have suggested. I think it's quite interesting that Agnew said this as someone, kind of almost as establishment as figures you get, the voice of TMS, etc. I'll just run through what he said quickly. He says, first, you have to understand that the 18 first-class counties essentially control the domestic structure. For that reason, I wish the 18 county chairman had been down there on the Hobart outfield with me to see Australia celebrating. That would make them fully understand that something needs to be done. The counties would still play in the Blast, they'd still play 50-over cricket, and they would have their own red ball tournament, possibly with 3-day matches that produce a conveyor belt for the Premier first-class competition, which would be 10 teams. So the 8 bases where you have the 100 plus 2 more. I know what I'm suggesting is radical, but the time has come to streamline the elite level of first-class cricket.
So creating new teams completely, new first-class teams. So Northern Superchargers becomes a red ball cricket team.
Plus
2 more. I mean, it's a lot more radical than Phil was talking about. I mean, it's the Kevin Peterson model, essentially.
Yeah.
And
it's extraordinary. I mean, I'd take this with a pinch of salt. I mean,
how long ago was it when he said that to you?
Yeah, so I interviewed Agnew not that long, a couple of years ago, and he was at that point a fierce advocate of 1 division, 18 counties, everyone plays everyone, and he said the switch to 2 divisions was what had killed counties like Leicestershire. So this is quite this feels very knee-jerk to me. He's speaking to a BBC reporter at the end of a test match that has been pretty harrowing. I don't know if he necessarily will think that in 6 months' time. Perhaps this is now a significant turning point for him. But it feels knee-jerk. And yeah, he is a Leicestershire man.
I wonder what they're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, there will be a lot of people affiliated to the smaller counties who are, I guess, at most under threat. Reading that column, thinking if this is the way the wind is blowing, maybe we're in trouble here, because if he starts to lose the support of people like Jonathan Agnew, who, as you say, is a kind of a traditionalist, then that is quite concerning. I still don't. I mean, what he's also. There are counties. Every county has cricketers who are contracted for 2, 3, 4 years to play all formats and get a certain amount of money based on that. So what happens to those contracts? They can't just be ripped up and start again. We're not leaving the 18 county model for some time yet, I don't think.
I do quite like the idea, though, of, or I'm amused by the idea of first-class franchises. Because obviously, with T20 or the 100, they obviously have names that sort of evoke T20 cricket, and whether you'd get like the Wimbledon wobble seamers and the Liverpool levers and that sort of thing. I don't know.
Sachin asks,
what question from Sachin? Excellent.
I think it's a different one. What are the quick wins that the ECB can implement to improve the state of red ball cricket this season? The structural reforms make sense, but it'll take a long time to see those results. And we've touched on a couple of them already. The changing the balls, for example. Is there anything else that we can do for the 2022 summer that could make a difference in the short term?
Well, there was the thing that Giles was talking about regarding the IPL, and basically forbidding a number of contracted cricketers from playing more than a few games of it, and therefore forcing them to come back and play red ball cricket. I mean, it's a good PR statement, but there's logic to it, I would suppose, up to a point. But I've said it before. I feel like from April onwards, or mid-April onwards, it really is just year dot, really, in the next cycle of English cricket, and I'm just fascinated to see how many of these players that we routinely talk about are going to be there playing every week, desperate to make runs, grinding it out. See, adopting the Marnus leave, fetishizing the leave almost. It'd be fascinating to see, what version of cricketer Liam Livingstone is come April and May, how much he plays. Same with James Vince, same with Joe Clark, same with so many of these names who are now completely necessarily in the mix. That doesn't really answer your question, I suppose. But I've already said about the ball, so someone else can have a go.
I think it's sort of touching on what Phil's just said, but making England players available more regularly to play county championship games would be a good start. And it just adds a lot more spice to a game. People are checking the scorecards more often. People care, that runs are scored if Stuart Broad is playing. They kind of mean more, really.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that last year you had a pretty good turnout from England's test guys.
You did first up, but could we get to a position where actually we would say, and perhaps we won't, but even England's white ball players, we would be happy for them to play championship cricket rather than playing in a white ball series against whoever the visiting country is. Now that would be a statement. That would be a statement saying we care about red ball cricket enough that we want whoever it is playing that county championship game rather than playing the third ODI of a 5 ODI series. That would seem like quite a symbolic step in the right direction.
I can just see Owen Morgan just stroking his white cat, watching all these screens in his lair somewhere. Well, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I guess that's difficult though, because then you get paying fans who want to see the best England white ball team that England have available.
Well, that was great fun when the C team played last summer. Everyone,
it was great fun.
Well, I think we all said that was the best part of the summer, wasn't
exactly,
it?
One thing, any value in an England Lions mashup in the build up to the first Test match, a kind of good old fashioned trial match that you used to have back in the good old days. The best 24 cricketers playing in a first class 4-day game on as flat a track as you can find in mid-May in the build up to that Test series.
Well, I think so.
That would be, you'd watch it as well.
Lots of people are talking about the difference between county championship and Test cricket, and if you can have more cricket that bridges that gap. We've had a few questions about England Lions possibly playing more cricket. I mean, Tom Harrison wrote that letter to Cricket Australia asking for our guys to play in the Shield. I just imagine the reaction in Cricket Australia
honestly,
HQ.
as if it wasn't embarrassing enough the last couple of months.
Please, sir, can my boys come
Also,
and play?
Tom Harrison saying that we need our players need more experience playing in Australia. Well, how many of that successful Lions trip actually played in this series? Only
Just
Ollie
Robinson. Yeah.
Meanwhile, you got Darren Lawrence who's sat on the bench. Anyway, that's another.
a separate conversation. But
one thing that puzzles me a bit is kind of like what's changed between when England were good between 2004 and 2012 and now. Like what has changed between like the structure of the game? Back then you had the Blast and the One Day Cup, and the Championship was already starting to be moved towards the margin. But one thing I wonder, just in terms of getting the quality back up, I mean, if you do want a short-term fix to get the quality better, would you look at like having one more overseas spot, possibly, maybe even a fund to get some players in? I mean, it's a bit of a, I don't know, not a shame, but like when the dominant overseas players tend to be like Mohammad Abbas and Kyle Abbott, sort of coming in bowling like an English bowler but just better. But I wonder if there's something there to just strengthen the teams basically, and that you had the loads of Colpacks back then.
I think that's a really good idea. Actually, the problem would be certain clubs might not be able to afford them. So in that case, you maybe look at the ECB and you say, okay, can we free up a fund, if you like, to help buttress the county's budgets, and then you could go to one or two. Nazim Shah, for example, was at Gloucester. That's. He's sharp. He's properly sharp, and he's raw, and he'll be great to watch. That's a brilliant move by a very progressive club, by the way, and a few more of those.
A couple of the young West Indies, like Jaden Seals, for example.
Yeah,
like a guy like that that's already test class and bowling quickly. Like
CricViz did the numbers on it, and 0.6% of the time, county batsmen face bowlers upwards of, I think, 80.
It's 140k, which is
It's about
87.
Yeah. So 0.6 of the time they face them, and that number goes up to 16% in once you get to test level. So your heart can bleed for Haseeb Hameed, but when he misses it by that much against Mitchell Starc, it's because he's never faced that kind of stuff before, and he's obviously not the only one.
Going back to Ben's question about kind of what has changed, I was just thinking that, so John Stern interviewed Steve Harmison for our latest issue, and Harmison was kind of lamenting the loss of the reduction in quality of the county championship over the years, and John asked Harmison what the peak was in his time, and he referred back to a game in 2005, Durham against Lancashire at Old Trafford, and John went and dug out the scorecards. So Lancashire had Muralitharan, Brad Hodge, Stuart Law, Andrew Flintoff, Jimmy Anderson and Dominic Cork in their sides. Durham had Mike Hussey, Mick Lewis was the other overseas player from Australia, Paul Collingwood, Dale Benkenstein, Phil Mustard, Liam Blunkett. That was a second division match. So if you think how different that is now, if you're a young player playing in that match, and that, I'm not saying that was what it was like all the time in 2005, but that is very different to the lineups we see now.
Yeah, I still do think though. Now you do get the odd county game where you go through the 211s. And it's like there are about 12, 13, 14 players who played international cricket, and it is still not quite the levels of names there, but it's not like a million miles off. I don't know. I do wonder if that has actually changed that much.
But I guess one thing that's tricky as well is that, and this comes back to the T20 question, it's not a solution to this, but like back then, the overseas thing you could do when your team wasn't playing international cricket would be coming to play county cricket. Now you have like a million different overseas gigs you can get that are a lot more fun, a lot easier, that also advertise you to other leagues, and it's like more of a career path. So that is tricky, and I don't know what the solution is, but that you think there would be a handful of players who are kind of sitting around doing nothing that would improve the quality and the speed of the bowling, the county championship stuff, possibly.
Yeah. I guess one thing that has changed is that the quality of overseas players is different. That Murley, literally all-time great, Holt spends summer after summer in England. I guess now you don't really get that. It's like it's a big news story when someone like Naseem Shah, who's not even that established as a Test cricketer, commits to a significant chunk of the season.
Yeah, or Rizwan was the other one.
Yeah.
That was really, when you see that, you're like, wow. Whereas actually that used to be the norm.
Yeah.
You think about Ashwin playing last summer and how big a deal that was as well. Yeah.
Just finally on England, Ethan asked, how do England approach the West Indies series? Who gets to go that's not currently involved at the moment? Just a few names that anyone wants to pick out?
We're on the carousel again.
No, it feels a bit ridiculous. I mean, I did this as part of the burning questions. That
Joe picked his squad.
I picked my squad. I won't go through it all now, but I had certainly, the top order clearly has to change. I think Crawley clings on based on a kind of couple of promising knocks at the end there. But I would I would throw out a few names. I think Sam Robson, who's we talked about before, should be part of the conversation as an experienced opener who probably got a bit hard done by and scored 1,000 runs last year. But I think they're much more likely to go to the Lions contingent, and that probably means Alex Lees and James Bracey probably competing to open with Crawley in the Caribbean. That's probably the way I'd go. I know you said you spoke to Alex Lees.
Yeah,
recently
probably
as well.
going to play that on next week's episode. But yeah, it's quite interesting. He's got a good record playing at Durham. He's not. I think it's a little bit like when before Rory Burns played for England, that he's just not had like a season where he's scored millions. He's had just lots of seasons where he's averaged about 40, which compared to other openers is actually pretty good.
And on Bracey, it'd be very unfair if Bracey's Test career amounts to 2 games where he kept wicket and batted at 7, and obviously they went horribly for him. But I think he deserves a chance at something. He's shown enough in county cricket. But I think we all have to be honest. We're picking these names out of hope and expectation. There is no, based on what we've seen over the last few years, it'd be quite odd if we thought, oh yeah, well they're going to average 40 plus in Test cricket. We just kind of hope one of these stick. Really,
I guess it will take 30 plus nowadays.
I think it also maybe depends a bit who actually the coach is by that time. Like, because for example, with Ollie Pope, who I think we would still all agree that there is a player there, but who looks like a shambles at the moment. But how does he get back to that level? If it's still Chris Silver in charge, I think he's going to do it in the current England environment. And so that we'll be going back to county cricket and basically figuring it out on his own. But if there is sort of a proper batting, knowledgeable figure there who can sort of grab a player and say, you need to be doing this, you need to fix this, you need to sort this, then actually I can see him doing that in the England environment. So I guess that's something as well. It actually depends who the coach is, and obviously they will have a lot of say as well. But then I would be less worried about them sticking with the same group, because I think to a large extent these are a lot of the. I mean, when we did a piece on Wisdom.com picking out the England's team, if it was just based purely on their first class averages, and that's removing their test numbers from that, and actually it's pretty similar to the players England have given a go over the last 2 years or so.
Josh Bohannon was the only specialist back.
Yeah, and he came through last season. He's not he could get a go pretty soon. But apart from that, Pope, they talk about his numbers at the Oval being extraordinary. Even if you take those out, he averages 46 in first class cricket. So like I guess that also comes into it quite a lot for the West Indies, I think.
And the guys just on the periphery were all guys who've already been given a go as well, which is quite interesting.
I wouldn't have, personally, I know Test Championship, all of that, I get it. But personally,
bottom of the league, Phil.
I know we are. It's fine. We've been there before. Personally, I wouldn't mind seeing certain players just be taken out the firing line for their own sake. Someone like David Malan, whose wife gave birth
during the Test match.
During the Test match, I think on overnight, and he had to go out and bat the following morning. He was obviously in Dubai for the T20 stuff. He's gone through this tour, and you could see how his form has ebbed away. Somebody like him should be a part of England's story, absolutely. But just let the boy have a rest. Joss Buttler is clear.
He doesn't want a rest though, does he?
He might not do. He might not do.
His chance could easily just go at the age he is.
Okay. But if you believe that he's absolutely the answer at number 3, irrefutably the answer at number 3, and he's up for it, and his energy levels are good, and all the rest of it, I interviewed him just before the tour. He spoke about bubble fatigue quite openly, and how it's affected him just like it's affected others. But if you look him in the eye and he says, I'm desperate for this and I want it, fine. But if there is any sense of vulnerability, any sense of dragging yourself through the mud, and it's not looked fun for a lot of them. This has not been fun. Mark Nicholas wrote a very good thing on Cricinfo about that. It's looked like a real toil for them. It's meant to be, you're meant to be living your dream. At the moment, that dream is a walking nightmare for a lot of them. Joss Buttler, everybody agrees. Joss Buttler looks shot. So take him out the firing line. I don't have an issue with that. And again, a couple of the opening batsmen. Will it benefit? Hasib Hamid won't be going on that tour, you assume. Rory Burns has made 6 or 7 ducks last year. Looks knackered. Looks shot. Might just benefit from just being away from the game for 6 weeks. April comes around very, very quickly. And I've said all along, broken record on it, but that to me is the starting point. So what happens in the West Indies, sure, it's important for pride, it's important for individual stories. But if there are fewer established people there and one or two more punts than you would ordinarily, then I'm okay with that because of the darkness that they'll be dragging themselves out from.
But if we assume for a second that Root continues as captain, and we assume that he captains in the West Indies, if he loses that series, whether it's with a developmental side or not, then it's hard to see how he can carry on. So do you not think he could end up, his position as captain could become untenable if they lose in the Caribbean, even if you're saying that series doesn't necessarily mean all that much?
Yeah, I hear that, but I think the circumstances are extreme at the moment, and I think there's a lot of players who have done both those previous tours, and the day-to-day circumstances are not like it used to be, where you play for England, you live in your dream, everyone else wants to do what you're doing with your life, and you crack on. It's not like that anymore. It's quite a miserable experience for a lot of international cricketers at the moment, and I think that has to be kind of taken into account when you're looking at the suitability and the readiness to go again, literally in 2 weeks' time. Go again, get up for it again. That is a big ask for a number of them. Even with Root, if Root says, "Do you know what, I want to still carry on," but he's not going to say this, but I would understand on a human level if he said that those 3 test matches, I can't face it. I would get that. And I wouldn't say that should necessarily be the end of his story. I think there's something unique about the here and now. The last thing in the world they want is to play three test matches next month, but that's what they're going to do. And I think that's quite extraordinary when they've just played 5. That would mean that they would have played 8 test matches in the space of 2.5 months. If you need to be funkier than you would be normally, then I'm okay with that personally.
And this obviously brings us back to the schedule a bit as well, and the demands that the ECB asks of these cricketers. I mean, and a lot of the players that we've talked about on this podcast, we haven't explicitly said it, but just playing a World Cup and then an Ashes series is unprecedented, I think, right? And it's no surprise that maybe that Woakes is not hitting the spot every ball by the end, and that Milan wants to get home to his newborn child, and that but Butler's putting one out into the deep at the MCG and that sort of thing. I mean, Bairstow is a sort of an outlier, but given the worst possible situation, that's when he's kind of he'll summon something to up your sort of thing. But yeah, I think that is a big factor as well. And again, that's not something with they have obligations and that sort of thing. But that's something we've said a lot, that the schedule is not giving them any chance to succeed basically, and it's continuing this year. I mean, next winter is actually, I think they might have 5 tours next winter, or between the end of the next summer and the summer after that, and it's just it's never ending. And
with the World Cup in the middle as well.
Yeah. So if it becomes a broader squad game, and you're not,
which it has, to be honest.
Yeah. Then I can understand that.
Like the idea of having a best 11 isn't completely out the window, but for a team with the schedule that England have, that has become I think there was a Simon Wilde from the Times. He tweeted something about the number of changes England made between each test match since maybe the first or second test in India, and it's like 4-4-5, 2-3-4. England don't have a best 11.
Yeah,
England had 25 test cricketers in 2021.
Sorry, just finally, just going back to your Joe Root thing. I mean, fair play to the bloke. He's captain now in more test matches than any other Englishman. And he's absolutely sure that he wants to carry on. I don't think he would know. He knows the game well enough to, hedge his bets in the aftermath of Hobart if he genuinely is thinking about relinquishing the job. He's not. He wants it. The line is quite telling. He said, "There's a lot that we need to do for this team, which deserves all of my energy." He's not going in the IPL auction as a consequence of that. I'll keep sacrificing as much as I can because I care so much about Test cricket in our country.
Well, this is
that's the words of a bloke who is absolutely desperate to turn this thing around. Fair play to him.
It's also, do you know what I mean? It's the words of someone who knows there's no one else who can take the job. You can read between the lines there. But
there is something honourable about that too.
Oh,
right?
Massively so. Even more so if he doesn't want it to carry on. But I don't know necessarily, because he says he wants to continue in the job. That means that if there was an alternative, he would still want to do that. But no, I mean, massive respect for him to continuing in this, because especially at this point, you'd think, just have a bat.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on, after the disappointment of the Ashes, surely Test cricket can only get better for England from here. Sportsbreaks.com are offering a once-in-a-lifetime cricket experience. Their sublime packages to Barbados, one of the bucket list cricket events. That is England on tour in the Caribbean. Sportsbreak.com are offering personalised tickets, travel and hotel packages around the Barbados Test match on the 16th to the 20th of March. This includes 10 nights in one of their hand-picked hotels, with breakfast included from the 13th of March. Return flights to Barbados from either Manchester or Heathrow, including all taxes, charges, and 23 kilos of hold luggage allowance, a 5-day standard ticket at the Kensington Oval, airport transfers by coach, transfers to and from the stadium as well. With Sportsbreak.com, if the event is cancelled or moved to an alternative date during the pandemic, you will receive a full refund. To book your package or to find out more, head to Sportsbreak.com. Ben, big news this week outside the Ashes, I guess it's the biggest news in cricket, was Virat Kohli has resigned as the Indian Test skipper a day or so after they fell to a 2-1 series defeat in South Africa. 4 months ago, I think, when he was captain of all 3 formats, this would have been unthinkable that Virat Kohli would not be captain in any format for India. But it's happened, his fall in power in Indian cricket has happened remarkably quickly.
Yeah, it's crazy to think back to that point, especially to think at the end of the.
Just imagine during the Lord's Test match,
exactly.
if you said in
the
6 months' time he's not captain of anything.
When he's on the verge of completing a series win in England to follow up a series win in Australia, and then they go home for the instead of playing the 5th Test, and then he relinquishes the RCB captaincy during the IPL, and then it's the T20 captaincy, saying he wants to focus on his captain in the other formats. Then he has the ODI captaincy taken away from him, and now this. I mean, Ganguly sort of insisted in his tribute to him, saying like this is his own personal decision, which sort of prompts you to wonder, is it his own personal decision? But I think it might well be, because I mean, this is a guy who has been so sort of enthusiastic and dedicated. I mean, if you look at Joe Root, imagine doing that in a country where like there's 1 billion fans and expectation on you.
Who actually like cricket.
Yeah, and then there's also a massive other tournament that is actually also loved in the IPL, and you're the captain of all 3, and you've done it for a lot longer, and all that, and you're just a hugely intense bloke anyway. I mean, it's been a marvel that he's gone on for as long as he has in one way, and also you can then kind of see how when you sort of start stepping back from one thing, you actually start kind of stepping back, you realize actually like the other stuff starts falling away kind of quite quickly in terms of what you feel you can actually keep mustering yourself up for. It's interesting to think about his legacy as a skipper, because I mean, you can look at it in some ways and think that there have been some quite big missed chances there. I mean, you look at the India tour to England in 2018 and the South Africa tour before that, and also especially this one now. I mean, if he'd won now, his legs would have been completely secure. First India captain to win in Australia, first India captain in South Africa. Now he's missed that last chance, and you actually wonder, like, India had a chance to cement themselves as a properly one of the great sides, and they have just slightly missed that. But the fact is that they have got up to the position to do that in the first place. I mean, when you think when they took over, they weren't really a team that competed overseas, really. I mean, and you can obviously you can't put all the credit for that at Kohli's door, because he has had a very good team to call upon. He's had very good fast bowlers that are better than India ever had. But I think he also has credit for realising that what India needed was to bring through a group of fast bowlers, not just 3, but 5 or 6 really, all of whom can compete with the best in the world.
Do you think Kohli deserves credit for that?
Well,
I think Kohli deserves a lot of credit overall, but isn't that just because they have more?
No, I think he deserves at least some credit for being part of the vision to do that. I mean, he's definitely not the only one, but I think it was sort of him and Ravi Shastri and Bharat Aaron, the bowling coach. You kind of saw that this was the way to do it, and as a group, they sort of identified that and put that plan into place. And I mean, you even look like someone like Ishant Sharma, right? He was a joke cricketer basically for the first half of his career. Statistically one of the worst bowlers has ever been. Was kind of, there'd be memes about him sort of daily about how silly he looks and that sort of thing, and he somehow under Kohli and that leadership as the whole thing. I mean, I'm saying it's not all about Kohli, but I think he does deserve quite a lot of credit. He went on to become one of the best bowlers in the world basically for a period of time, and he did that thing in the magazine saying that he was the best Test bowler in the world, and that would have been unthinkable when he was this sort of gangly guy who was just spraying it everywhere and yeah, blame
CricViz for that.
Yeah,
but yeah, sure.
So yeah. I mean, it's a huge moment. I guess
it was shocking up to a point, but then the more I thought about it, the more it made sense to me, and not just coming on the back of the the loss of the one-day captaincy and the T20 stuff, and the sort of brouhaha, if you like, around that issue. Irrespective of that, it felt like this was the end of their cycle, and reflected in Pujara and Rahane's diminishing form, although Pujara played quite nicely here and there in South Africa. But it felt like they were building towards that point, and Kohli has given everything over, 7 years or something ridiculous like that. We're talking about Joe Root wanting to carry on. Well, Kohli's that job is up there compared to the England Test captaincy in terms of intensity, scrutiny, expectations, living it 24 hours a day, all the rest of it. It didn't massively surprise me. And of course, he's not scoring the runs that he wants to as well. So sport works in cycles. And so the more I thought about the Kohli thing, which did shock me initially, the more it began to make a kind of sense. He's at that kind of age where he's won 40 test matches as captain. He wants 10,000, 11,000 test runs. He wants to get somewhere up towards that mark of 100 international hundreds. He's immensely fit. He's going to want to play for 5 years, and he might be thinking deep down in his private moments, I've taken this team on my own steam as far as I can go. I need now to look after myself and my own game a little bit more.
And it makes sense from a team point of view because they've got an easier run of fixtures coming up. They have another big away tour like they've had sort of like a string of for about 3 years now. The other thing that was interesting as well, just looking at that South Africa series, is that what India have especially made a habit of is those kind of last day sort of like rousing wins, basically. Like you give them any sort of sniff on the last day of a test match and they will absolutely snatch. You think back to the Oval and Lords last year. I mean, it was the Lords one where England kind of would have hoped to skittle the tail and then chase around.
England were favourites
200
on day 5.
Yeah, and then but Boomer and Shami smash 100 quickly, and then India are all over. And Kohli plays a large part in that, obviously, just as the fielding captain. But he sort of creates that intensity with how he is on the field.
It looked like living hell for an England batsman that day.
Yeah,
and I thought,
and so obviously he gives South Africa a lot of credit for how they batted in those last 2 chases. But those are chases that like India have been kind of not winning in their sleep, but winning routinely with that style. And South Africa sort of saw it out. And actually, it was interesting. I guess we'll talk more about the actual on-field behaviour and that sort of thing. But India normally, when something like that review against Elgar went against them in the past, they would have sort of like used that as motivation to sort of bowl a spell that would take 3 or 4 wickets and win the game. Here, they just lost their heads, sprayed it about. Sort of.
It was totally unhinged. They completely lost control. That little period after that. So yeah, if people didn't watch it, Dean Elgar's given out on field for an LBW by Erasmus actually, and Elgar doesn't seem that confident in going for the review. Review shows the ball's going over the stumps, and the Indian players completely lose any sense of control. They basically start accusing the broadcasters of lacking integrity and saying that, I think Ashwin said something, you're going to need to do more than this, Supersport. And you had Kohli bending down, speaking to the stump mic, trying to get a message across to the broadcasters. And South Africa then scored some quick runs, and suddenly the run chase from 60 to 1 to 100 for 1 looks completely different. So what did you make about that passage of play?
Well, I guess it's interesting because I mean, the thing with the broadcasters, this isn't the first time someone has complained about this. Like this is what Australia said in the Sandpaper Gate series. Like I think Warner, even before the sandpaper thing happened, he was sort of questioning how South Africa were getting the ball to reverse swing so much. And Kohli, even before this incident, was talking about how the stump mics were being turned up for when India are on the field and then turned down for when South Africa are on the field. I mean, presumably implying that this allows the South Africa team to...
but the implication there was more that they've doctored Hawkeye.
Yes, that is ridiculous, and that is, I mean, and also it's just not Supersport that even control Hawkeye. There are independent technology people that come in and do these things, and you can look in the playing conditions, and that outlines who the approved suppliers are. So that is ridiculous. That's true. But I think the thing is as well. So yeah, he lost the plot, and a lot of the team sort of followed his lead at that point, and none of them were punished for it, which I think people were quite surprised by, and said that this is a sign of the BCCI's power and that sort of thing.
They said because there's no actual stipulation regarding.
Well, that's the thing. I wasn't hugely surprised by it because
the rules.
Surprised you to know that I've read the code of conduct a few times, and basically it kind of exists just to catch people who swear on stump mic. which is ridiculous, and it's not really
Is
fit
there
for
not,
purpose.
Ungentlemanly conduct. Is that in the rules?
But there is contrary to the spirit of the game, which never gets used.
Bringing the game into disrepute, surely.
Yeah, but that's more for off-field stuff. So if a guy has
Okay.
like I think that might have been used against Shannon Gabriel possibly when he was made the homophobic comment to Joe Root, but that's more of like if a guy has like a
That is
does something
interesting.
like is caught doing something racist off the field sort of thing rather than on the field. So yeah, I think people, it just needs to be looked at and basically overhauled because all people were raising the it's not just that there's not something to stipulate this. It's like when Rabada was sort of banned for that celebration near Joe Root, and again by the letter of the law, because it has something that says any sort of act which could bring about a angry response from a batter upon their dismissal warrants a punishment. And that's like a weird sort of metaphysical thing, like anything I do could prompt a reaction from anyone. I mean, it's not my fault if some hypothetical batter is going to get annoyed by me shouting, but that is what the code of conduct says. So it's not a hugely compelling document in the way that laws of cricket are.
Phil, just on South Africa, amazing series win to get 200 plus chases. One of their best batters retires mid-series. Other than Dean Elgar and at a push, Markram and Bavuma, it's a very unestablished top six. They had a bowler batting 7, Oliver playing first Test series in a few years, Marco Jansen first Test series, Lungangili's not played that much Test
And
cricket.
a keeper coming in to debut for
And
second
Rabada's not quite been on it for a couple of years in the same way that he's normally been. An incredible series, but then also like I guess the emergence of Keegan Peterson was probably most interesting. The way he batted in that last Test with a pair of I think 70 and 80.
Yeah, we were saying last week, I find myself fonder and fonder of South African cricket because they still find a way to bring through talent, and they remain an absolutely essential part of the fabric of world cricket, but we sometimes forget about them a little bit. And because they have a dysfunctional history, they sometimes, and they're not a part of the big three, quote unquote, but they are absolutely critical to it for a number of reasons. The talent that comes out of South African cricket, although it sometimes disperses around the world due to economics, but the talent is as good as anywhere else. And the competitive instincts are as strong as ever before. And this series, we were all concerned, or as neutrals, we were concerned that it might be a little bit lopsided. And especially after that first Test, they lost by 113 runs, I think it was, in the first Test. And they were blown away with the bat, all out for under 200 in their first innings. And we kind of thought, all right, well, this could get quite heavy against them. But what we saw again is what we've seen year after year. They have this kind of depth of competitive spirit that comes through, epitomised by their skipper, who was very interesting after the game on the second Test match when he was 96 not out, won that game. Elgar did brilliant knock, battered and bruised, beaten up on the canvas, all the rest of it, and he comes through to win that game. And then he spoke about Rabada afterwards, and he says he's our diamond cricketer, he's our great world-class bowler, and I had to have a word with him because he wasn't delivering for us. And we had a few harsh words in the dressing room, me and him. And interesting to hear a skipper say that, but indicative, I think, of a bloke who now has come through via the back roads a little bit, not a particularly celebrated cricketer, but his record is outstanding as an opening bat, the best opening batsman statistically in South African history in home conditions.
Yeah.
And now, and it looked like he was the last man standing when he got the job after Du Plessis, but now it looks like his job for a long time, and that he's building a kind of coherent group. All right, it lacks the star quality and the class of the Callis era and the De Villiers era, but what it does appear to have is a togetherness again. Rabada was transformed in that final Test match and was unplayable. And it was a really rousing series. A really, really rousing series for the game. Also, just briefly on the pitches, spicy pitches, but you could score runs. Now, me and Ben had a chat about this last week, and he said, ideally, you'd want slightly less life early on. And I can get that, and I can understand that. But even so, you take the third Test pitch at Cape Town, which was spicy and a bit up and down, but your boy Peterson made 270 odds and batted absolutely beautifully in pressure cooker situations against, a world-class attack. Bumrah and Shami and the rest. So So it was really, really good for the game, really good for South African cricket as well, because they need the people to come with them, I think. And if you're a South African cricket lover, then you'd have been pretty hurt and stung, I think, by some of the things that have happened regarding the diaspora of certain players, the talent drain there, and then the de Villiers retirement, and then the de Kock retirement out of nowhere. And these things judder you, and that will hurt if you're a fan. So to see them come back and win 2-1 with a nascent team is an outstanding result. Great for them.
Absolutely.
South Africa have half a chance in the World Test Championship as well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of projection, right? Of what? Yeah.
So that projection that was doing the rounds, which I didn't quite agree with, it was especially sort of undervaluing India, I think. And I think an India-Pakistan final, which would obviously be amazing, is the most likely thing at the moment. But South Africa's, their 3 away series are England, South Africa, England, New Zealand, and Australia, which are sort of toughish on paper, but they've never lost a series to New Zealand. I mean, obviously, best New Zealand side ever, but still, they'll have a chance in that one, considering how they played here. You'd think they have a pretty good chance against England in England, and Australia as well, as they have another pretty good record there. They haven't lost there in absolutely ages. So that they have, and I think they also will only need to just win those 3 series rather than to win them without sort of whitewashes or anything. So a couple of like a 1-1 in New Zealand maybe, and then a 2-1 and a 2-1, and that could be enough just about. And India have kind of messed it up a bit. I mean, they've got to play that 1 more test in England and then 4 against Australia, and I think they can only afford maybe 2 draws or 1 loss. So that will be there's a chance that they don't get to the final. As I say, could be Pakistan, India, which would also be great.
Another great series win this week was Ireland beating West Indies 2-1 in the Caribbean in the ODI Super League, which takes Ireland to 3rd place in the Super League. They played a lot more games than most other teams, but still. Last game was brilliant. They won by 2 wickets. Andy McBride scored 59 batting at number 3 and took 4 for 28 with the ball for Ireland to win that game, and they were affected by a number of COVID enforced absentees as well. So that was a really good win from them. Just on the women's Ashes, which gets underway later this week, England have played a couple of T20s against themselves. They've got the England A team there at the same time as them. England A beat England in both games, despite Sophie Ecclestone taking 7 for 14 in one of them, which is quite interesting. And
Eve Jones in the Michael Lum role, isn't it? She made a couple of pretty key 20 odds opening the batting, and obviously remember for the 2010 World T20 when Lum and Keys-Wetter showed England that Denley and Trott weren't the way forward.
And some news related to the Women's World Cup that's not too far away is that South Africa's Dania van Niekerk is out of the World Cup, which is obviously a massive blow to South Africa.
She slipped at home, I think. It's
really?
a freak injury, and obviously she's massive for them, and a brilliant captain as well. Obviously a brilliant player just on her own merits, but she lifts that team. And obviously considering that T20 World Cup 2 years ago now, when they were within a couple of hits of beating Australia, that is a massive blow for a team that would have fancied doing something quite special.
I feel like more people are slipping at home than used to.
It's because they're spending more time at home, I guess.
That's true. And Joe, we talked about it earlier, but there's a new Wisden Cricket Monthly out this week. We talked about one of the cover feature, the burning questions for English cricket, but what else is in it?
So that's the lead story. We've also got, it's our annual men's test team of the year, which we took a year off in 2020 just because there wasn't enough test cricket played to make it worthwhile. So we've got a panel of 28 writers and pundits who have helped us pick that 11. I think we're going to be doing a video separately about that, aren't we, to kind of talk through the selections. And we've also got the female cross format 11 of last year as well. And we've got a lovely interview with, I'm going to give it away, but anyway, Fawad Alam, which Sajid Sadiq did about his long wait to get back into the Pakistan side, and also how happy he was to be in our team of the year, which was really, really nice. Genuinely really lovely to see how excited he was by that. So he can, as of Thursday, he can tell his dad. He was looking forward to telling his dad. He said he was going to wait for the magazine to come out first. And one
panelist didn't pick Joe Root in their team.
Yeah, that's John Houghton. I think he needs to be named and shamed for this.
Quite right.
Yeah. I can only assume he's been deliberately contrary. But,
if Fawad Alam listens to the pod, he can tell his dad today or tomorrow, which is
That's true, seeing as I've told the world.
His dad's going to find out.
Oh, shit.
Shocker.
Right.
Edit.
I think if Fawad Alam's dad's got 1 hour 35 minutes into this pod, he's done pretty well.
He probably wanted to hear the news from me, I imagine, anyway.
What else is in the magazine?
And we've got, I mentioned the Steve Harmison interview that John did, which is really, really nice. My interview with the Parkinson twins, which we had a preview of on the pod last week or the week before. In the lead up to the Women's Ashes, Phil's done a kind of compare and contrast piece with Meg Lanning and Heather Knight, speaking to Heather about their relationship in previous battles as they kind of before they go at it again.
Do you enjoy that?
I did. I thought it was very nice. Yeah,
Oh, smashing. One of my best, or like just a middling piece?
not one of your best, I would say.
Okay, right.
But no, it was good. So I mean, they're always good.
Oh, thanks, mate.
And I like your Danny White interview as well. That was funny.
Yeah, great end question. You've got to buy the magazine to get it, but it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
And
She's funny.
she is funny. And then our columnists have got Lawrence Booth and Andrew Miller tackling the here and now of the Ashes debacle. And what else have we got? Andy Zoltzman doing his numbers.
What number is it this time?
52,
52,
which was
okay.
the issue. But I don't know if he knew that. Maybe he
Is
did.
that
Maybe he did. Bradman's tests numbers.
Number
you
of test matches he
number
played.
of tests,
Yeah,
yeah. And all the rest of it.
excellent.
What else, Joe? Peter Oborne, the brilliant, celebrated. Why are you laughing?
It's the way you said it. It wasn't the name I was next expecting you to say.
Well, I think Peter Oborne's an absolute legend, institution and a man of letters and all the rest of it. He's brilliant. Anyway, he wrote about the year that he fell in love with cricket, for the My Golden Summer series. 1966 was his moment, and he writes it with typical class and elegance. And it was a bit of a coup to get the bloke in, actually, because there are writers, and then there's someone like him.
And Jim Wallace interviewed the gaffer, Alex Stewart, who told Jim about his life in cricket, which starts with him saying he wishes it was a life in football rather than life in cricket. That was that was the dream.
Chelsea fan, right? I think. Is that right? Yeah,
I think so. I had mentioned it once or twice in the past.
It.
So that's a nice one as well. Yeah, loads in there.
Awesome. As always, you can get the magazine from wisdom.com/shop. We had one email in from a listener, Z, who asked, why is there more coverage about the Under-19 World Cup, even after England beating the defending champions, which they did do yesterday. They bowled Bangladesh out for 97, I think, 97 or 98. The top scorer for Bangladesh was their number 11, who scored 33. And then England won that by 7 wickets. That's a very good start to their campaign. And Ben, you were saying that because New Zealand aren't in the World Cup because of they basically decided that it was their minors, their teams, they would be forced to spend too much time in isolation period, both sides. They're not actually in the World Cup. So England's group is basically the weakest ones. Having beaten Bangladesh, they're in pole position to qualify. So they're basically already through after one game.
Yeah, although it's now quite a soft bubble out there because basically everyone agreed that it would be too much to put the kids through that, and now they're all kind of relatively free. So yeah, but I guess they'd have to isolate when they get back. But yeah, England future's bright for English cricket, I guess.
That's it. We're
Don't
pretty
worry-
buoyant around
don't
here.
worry, folks. It's fine.
Right, cheers for getting through this, guys. Well done, Ben. Well done, Joe. Well done, Phil. This has been the Wisdom Cricket Weekly podcast, and we'll be back next week where we'll be talking about some white ball cricket and the Women's Ashes. Cheers.